He stopped Belgium, completely stopped them. 90 minutes against one of the most talented attacks in world football, and the scoreboard just sat there. Zero. The shots kept coming. The pressure kept building. The names got bigger. The chances got clearer. But every time Belgium thought they had finally broken through, there was this giant figure in front of goal acting like the ball had personally offended him. And after a while, something strange started happening. It stopped feeling like football. It started feeling like survival. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. On paper, this should have been routine. Belgium had stars everywhere, a squad filled with elite players, a so-called golden generation that had spent years being described as one of the strongest groups in international football. Players who had faced the biggest stages imaginable. Players expected to dominate matches exactly like this. Then there was Iran, the underdog, the side expected to sit back and absorb pressure, the side expected to suffer. But then Alireza Beiranvand happened, and almost immediately the night became something else entirely. Because just 3 minutes in, there was a moment that felt like disaster. Romelu Lukaku charged into him, bodies collided, Beiranvand hit the ground. And suddenly nobody was thinking about saves anymore, because people had seen this before. People remembered what happened in the World Cup against England in 2022. They remembered the ugly collision, the concern, the confusion, the questions afterward. So when he stayed down this time, you could almost feel everyone thinking the same thing, not again. And suddenly the entire match paused around one question: can he continue? Because sometimes football changes instantly. 1 second you're watching tactics and formations. The next second you're watching a human being trying to get back on his feet. And for a few moments, nobody knew. Then he stood up, and the story changed again. Because now Belgium had a problem, a massive problem, because whatever happened in those opening minutes seemed to flip a switch. Suddenly, Beiranvand wasn't just making saves, he was refusing reality. A Tielemans strike looked dangerous, saved. A close-range chance arrived, saved. Another shot, saved. Another attack, saved. And eventually something weird started happening inside the stadium. Belgium players began looking frustrated, not surprised, frustrated. Because surprise happens once, frustration happens after repeated failure. And repeated failure was becoming the theme of the night. 7 saves, 7, against attackers who spend their lives beating goalkeepers, against players who usually force mistakes, against players who normally make defenders panic. Nothing, absolutely nothing. But here's where the story starts becoming bigger than one match, because sometimes a performance looks unbelievable until you ask the question that matters most. How? How does someone become this difficult to beat? How does a goalkeeper suddenly look like he has 8 arms? How does someone seem to arrive at the ball before everyone else even understands where it's going? Because when people looked closer at Beiranvand's story, they started finding things that almost sounded made up. He didn't grow up inside elite football academies. He didn't follow some polished path designed by professionals. He wasn't raised inside systems built to create stars. He grew up as a shepherd, and not in the romantic movie version people imagine. Real hardship, real movement, real uncertainty. His family moved constantly. There was no perfect football environment, no luxury, no comfort, no carefully planned future. And some stories say that as a child he spent time throwing stones as games. Sounds small, sounds almost meaningless. Until you think about what goalkeeping actually is: judging distance, timing movement, reading trajectory, reacting instantly. Tiny decisions repeated thousands of times. Because sometimes the things that shape athletes don't look important when they're happening. They only become important years later. But even that wasn't the hardest part, because reaching Tehran brought another level of struggle. And suddenly, football wasn't the only thing he was fighting. He worked jobs, factory work, cleaning work, anything available. There were stories of sleeping in difficult conditions, stories of uncertainty, stories where the dream itself started looking impossible. And this is where the narrative becomes uncomfortable. Because football loves showing us the ending, Football loves trophies. Football loves celebrations. Football loves highlight clips. It doesn't always show the years where people are invisible, the years where nobody cares, the years where quitting makes more sense than continuing. But Beiranvand kept going, and eventually he reached the biggest stages in the world. Now here's where things become even more interesting, because his performance against Belgium wasn't just happening inside a vacuum. There were other problems surrounding Iran, preparation issues, logistical complications, questions around circumstances away from the pitch, less ideal conditions compared to football superpowers with endless resources and stability. And whether people agreed on the scale of those problems or not, one thing was obvious. This was not a team arriving with a perfect road behind them. This was not a smooth operation, which made the performance feel even stranger. Because usually football works a certain way. Preparation creates confidence. Confidence creates performance. Performance creates results. That's the formula. That's the expectation. But every now and then, football breaks its own rules. And that's when things get fascinating. Because suddenly people weren't just talking about saves anymore. They were talking about possibility. Could Iran actually do something historic? Could they go somewhere they had never gone before? Could this become more than one night? Because that's the dangerous thing about moments like this. They create belief, and belief changes everything. Fans start calculating scenarios. Players start seeing opportunities. Expectations start shifting. Suddenly, you're not just trying to survive anymore. You're trying to make history. But history creates pressure, a lot of pressure. Because once people believe something extraordinary might happen, every next match feels heavier, every mistake matters more, every decision matters more, and that's where the tension started building. Because there was a counter-argument, there always is. Some people looked at the game and said football can be random, goalkeepers sometimes have incredible nights. One performance doesn't change reality, one match doesn't rewrite hierarchy. And that's fair, because football is full of temporary miracles. We've all seen them. Players becoming unstoppable for 90 minutes and disappearing afterward. Teams shocking the world before crashing back down. It happens. But the reason people kept coming back to Beiranvand wasn't just the saves. It was everything around the saves. The collision, the pressure, the history, the struggle. The feeling that this wasn't appearing from nowhere. It felt like years arriving at the same moment. Years of difficulty, years of sacrifice, years of invisible work, all exploding onto one stage. And maybe that's why the image stayed with people. Because for 90 minutes he didn't look like a goalkeeper, he looked like a wall. He looked impossible. He looked like an octopus standing in goal refusing to let reality happen. And maybe the strangest part of all is this: the saves were incredible. But they may not have been the biggest thing people remembered. Because long after the match ended, another question remained. If someone can survive everything before football, everything after football suddenly starts looking a lot smaller.